Hi, I'm Robert Osborne. We're looking at ways that Latinos are portrayed in films, and with me is my co-host, Chon Noriega, author and professor and film preservationist. Thanks for being here, Chon.
Thank you, Robert.
Now, the next film we have coming up, like all of our films tonight, is a TCM premiere. This one stars two really wonderful actors, Robert Duvall and Verna Bloom, and the title is Badge 373. So why this particular film? Why'd you pick it?
Well, it's a fascinating film because in some ways it's a sequel to The French Connection, dealing with the real-life exploits of Eddie Egan, New York police officer.
Called Popeye Doyle in French Connection, but here called what?
Eddie Ryan.
Eddie Ryan.
Played by Robert Duvall.
Okay.
But in terms of the portrayal of Puerto Ricans and Latinos generally, the film marks a pretty important shift. First of all, this is the beginning of a shift from police procedurals to the idea of the vigilante cop who's working outside the law in order to bring justice. But in terms of the portrayal of the Latino population, it's a shift from portraying the youth as juvenile delinquents to in some ways really criminalizing the entire community at precisely that moment in time when they're organizing on behalf of their civil rights and in terms of social issues that they're facing. And in some way, the film is very pernicious about how it does this. They actually cast Felipe Luciano as one of the kind of two main gangster-type characters running an organization modeled very directly on the Young Lords, which Luciano had actually chaired when it formed in 1969.
Tell about the Young Lords, what that is.
Well, the Young Lords was modeled after other groups at that time, the Black Panthers, the Brown Berets, but also white groups that were focusing on poverty. And they addressed issues of gentrification, which was an issue facing Puerto Ricans living in Spanish Harlem, healthcare, education. They ran breakfast programs for youth. They ran free clinics. And what happens in this film is all of that pretty much gets ignored. And the view is that largely this is a community that is attempting to arrange a Cuban Revolution style takeover of Puerto Rico. So with respect to the Puerto Rican community, it's quite a disparaging portrayal and led to a considerable amount of protest.
And what we have to keep in mind, as you pointed out so well, is that they weren't getting any positive images in other films at this time. This was kind of it. Every film you got about Latinos were shown in this way.
Yeah, I mean, other groups have been the focus of gang films as well. It seems to be a pretty universal genre. But when it's the only way in which a community is depicted, then I think there's cause for concern.
Yes, indeed. Does great damage.
Yeah.
Let's look. Here's the movie from 1973, directed by Howard Koch and with an exceptionally talented cast, Badge 373. Well, this film actually was released right around the time that Robert Duvall received his first Academy Award nomination for his work in the 1972 blockbuster The Godfather. And I'm back with my co-host, Chon Noriega, to talk more about Badge 373. Now this, does kind of present, again, a negative image of Puerto Ricans and Cubans and all of that. Have there been any movies? I mean, this was 1973. Have there been any movies since then, all these years later, that have really portrayed Puerto Rican family life and Puerto Ricans as close-knit families?
Well, I think what's unfortunate is that for Puerto Rican and for Cuban American, there have been very few films, period. And what you see is a recurrence of the gang films, say Cuban American, something like Scarface. So you can't really chart progress, and there's really not enough films to even suggest a progression one way or another.
It's kind of shocking, really, when you think of it.
Yeah,
because other Latino images have certainly improved.
Well, I think for Mexican American, which has always been the largest population and located in the Southwest primarily, but for the most part, even with Mexican American and with Caribbean Latinos, you're really going to have to look to the independent films more than anything. I think what's interesting about this film is it recruits Felipe Luciano to this role, largely on the promise that there's going to be a strong speech in the film about Puerto Rican independence. And it kind of ends up on the cutting room floor, but he goes on to become the first Puerto Rican who's on a nightly news broadcast by a network, and is also a published poet. And the other actor in the film, you may or may not recognize as Latino, would be Henry Darrow, who had to change his name from Henry Delgado early in his career as
to
a
get
way of
work.
getting more roles, yeah.
Yeah, wow. So not a lot of progress is being made, we have to say, in this instance.
Unfortunately, not in terms of access to Hollywood release for feature films.
Right.
There's certainly much more that can be done.
Well, thank you so much. You bring such an interesting perspective to all this.
Thank you.
Thanks for being here, and you will come back. Okay. Well, I'm going to say goodnight right now to Chon, but only for a couple of days because he's going to be back to help me introduce more films on Thursday when we actually wrap up our film festival about Latino images in film. We'll have some great films on Thursday's lineup, so do plan to join us. But in the meantime, stick around for another TCM premiere right now. It's a rarely seen movie from 1962 about the life of Puerto Rican immigrants living in New York City.